Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show. I'm your host, Mike Huffaker. And today we're coming to you from the Aspen offices in Chicago. Today's conversation is a big one. My guest built one of the most consequential platforms in the history of dentistry. From a single practice in East Syracuse, New York, to a network that touches 9 million patients a year across 5 healthcare brands. But the story I want to tell you today isn't really about location counts or enterprise value. It's about impact. What nearly 3 decades of building this platform has actually meant for the patients who walk through the door, the providers who built careers inside it, and the people who show up to do the work every day. Bob Fontana is the founder, chairman, and CEO of TAG, the Aspen Group. He founded Aspen Dental in 1998, built the practice ownership program that has helped hundreds of dentists become owners, and has led the Healthy Mouth Movement's commitment to tens of millions of dollars in donated care for veterans and underserved patients. Last year, he was named the industry's dental titan. Bob, thank you so much for having us here to your offices.
Yeah.
This is really
a pleasure. I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, it's quite the treat. And I have to say, so I launched this podcast about 2.5 years ago. Yeah. And when I was first launching it, the premise was I want to speak with executives that are making things happen in the dental industry, all DSO focused. And I had a very short list of people that I wanted to have on the podcast at some point. Yeah. And you were on that list from day one. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to make this happen.
No, happy to be here. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. So I think what would be helpful for the conversation is we'll go back to Syracuse for a second because it can kind of frame the rest of the discussion that we're having.
Yeah.
When you first founded Aspen, what was the problem you were looking to solve? And at that moment in time, did you have any notion that it would be touching 9 million patients a year?
I had no notion of that. I mean, sometimes I get asked that question and people think, there's like master plan and vision. Right. And so, in the early days when I got done with school, I was undergrad, I was thinking about going to school to be a dentist and had some family members that were dentists and, got involved with a small dental company. And also became friendly with the dentist. And the dentist, we're talking about a bunch of things, trying to think about dental school. He's like, you know what, you'd be better on the business side. Dental schools might not be your gig. And it was interesting. There was a point of time there that I was really, thinking about that. And I was sort of also like fascinated by lens crafters. Mm-hmm. And if you think about lens crafters, back in the day, lens crafters was like glasses and frames in about an hour, on-site lab, retail locations, multiple frames all over the place. And if you juxtapose what they were doing against private practice, they're effectively competing and give people a choice and access. And that resonated with me. And so when we started out early on, we thought, geez, could we segment the market? Can we really understand this consumer well and provide a different approach? In fact, I'll share a story. Like we early on viewed private practice and, it wasn't really DSOs back then, but like private practice as the no practice.
Yeah.
No, I don't accept your insurance. No, I can't see you today. No, we don't have weekends. No, I don't have an on-site lab. No, I don't have patient financing. No, I'm not going to give out my fees. No, I don't even understand you. All this stuff, right? And if you think about brands, consumer brands are the opposite of that. They're trying to give every reason to get your business. Mm-hmm. So we said in a world full of no's, can we be the yes organization? And that really is still the foundation today, that mindset. So that was an important part of our DNA and who we were. And I think it's still an important part to each of the brands that we support.
Yeah. So you've made it a mission to break down barriers to care.
Yeah.
And, we talk about access, we talk about cost, we talk about convenience. Mm-hmm. And you've been doing this for 28 plus years now. Mm-hmm. When you think about those 3 things, the cost, convenience, and access, what has been the most difficult one to remove from a barrier to care for patients?
Well, listen, I think cost and access are always the top 2. If you just think about, when you think about how expensive dentistry can be, reimbursement's not great. a big portion of the population doesn't have insurance. Right. And I think to try to fit it into your budget and your lifestyle, I think it can be hard. And that's why sometimes dentistry becomes discretionary, because people are saying like, do I pay the mortgage? Do I pay my car payment? How do I get through life? And then, I know I might have some challenges or a problem, but I'll push it off. And I'll push it off and I push it off. And so I think cost is a big driver for sure. And we try to be value oriented and understand that. And of course, convenience, does it fit within their schedule? And it's funny because I always quote, Jeff Bezos was asked a question around, things that he can predict. Where's the world going to be in 10 years? And I think, one of the things he says, I don't know. Yeah. But here's what I do know. No one's going to come to him and say, can you make it a little bit more expensive?
Right.
Can you make it slower? Send me my stuff in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And he knows effectively, so certain things I can't build a business model around, but those things won't change. I can build a business model around that. People always going to want it more convenient, always going to want it a little bit faster, always going to want it a little bit more affordable. And that type of stuff resonates with me.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about knowing the consumer really well. Yeah. And I think it probably ties to some of what you just discussed, but what does that really mean? Like, who is the consumer? Who are you serving? How are you solving those problems?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, we're brand forward. We've always felt like, yes, we are a collection of dental offices, but I almost view like we're a consumer healthcare brand. And I think the best brands in the world really understand like who is their consumer, what are they trying to solve, how do they segment the market? Walmart's different than Target, Starbucks different than Dunkin' Donuts, right? And so they think about that in terms of segmentation. We do too. And we say, listen, we're not trying to set up our services or operating model for everybody. Of course, we'll see everybody, right? But in terms of our core segmentation, we think that there's a big part of what I'll call sort of working class, middle America fighting to get through life. I grew up in a family very much like that. My parents were divorced. We were very blue collar. Yeah. Those sacrifices I mentioned earlier, they were true of my parents. I mean, they just said, listen, can't afford it. What's interesting too is like, you when something's generally happening in your mouth. Like you might not know you have high cholesterol, but when your gums are bleeding, when you have some swelling, some sensitivity and whatnot. And so it's not that they don't know. It's sort of like life gets in the way. And that's a big part of America. And I think when we think about the things that we do at Aspen and Clear Choice, we're really trying to solve what we think are important, both functional and emotional barriers and challenges for that part of the population. But knowing that patient, the way we know the patient, the way we think about it, again, like the best consumer brands, instructs everything that we do, where we locate, how do we think about affordability, how do we think about on-site labs, how do we think about where we locate in the community, how we think about these patient journeys. All those things I think are really coming out of the sort of obsession, if you will, that we have with who is this patient and making sure that our operating model and our teams understand that, with a great deal of clarity, who they are and what we're trying to solve. Yeah.
I know that you were inspired by LensCrafter. And when we talk about a branded model at the Aspen Group, Aspen Dental is really an N of one in the industry at this point. We see other large organizations; they typically are not branded. There are some branded models in the mid-market segment, but not to anywhere near the scale that you all have achieved. Yeah. Why is it important, the branded model, to you? What are the benefits that the patients receive as a result of a branded model? Yeah. And why do you think there hasn't been another Aspen?
I don't know. I think there's been a lot of DSOs that certainly have copied or, try to take at least parts of what we've done, which I think is flattering. And I think that's, that happens, right? But I think about the brand in a couple of ways. One, it really is an attachment for our teams, right? Yeah, it says something like who we are, what that really means, what it means about our culture, our operating model. And we're not just sort of a collection of assets that have been rolled up. Right. Yep. This is what this brand stands for. We have our own language, effectively, right? Tight operating model, and which we've replicated now over and over and over, obviously, across the country. And then there's just, I think, a practical side of the brand when we think about, marketing and patient demand and thinking about that acquisition funnel, which I think is really important for the providers that we support, right? Can we generate demand efficiently to put into their offices? And I think being able to do that at scale nationally with a branded model is important.
Yeah.
The downside of the brand is everything aggregates to the brand. So, Aspen sees roughly 30,000 patients a day, so you're 150,000 patients a week. If 1% have a challenge or, an issue, right? So it goes online, people are like, and so then you're sort of dealing with that because there's not context on how many patient visits you see.
Yeah.
It can represent a challenge because dentistry, listen, our teams, I'm proud of what our teams do every day, but they're not going to be perfect. And dentistry is tough, right? There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
30,000 patients a day?
30,000 patients a day.
30,000 patients a day.
Yeah.
When you think about that number, you really are achieving that mission of providing accessibility to patients. And when you sum it up into the 9 million plus, that's so many individuals that are now able to get care. But when we look at overall numbers in the industry and a lot of data that comes out, I think BCG was saying there's still 46% of US adults that don't see a dentist or don't receive care.
Yeah.
What do you think the kind of upper limits are of the potential to continue to grow a model like this? Do you think there's always going to be a segment of the population that just will be uncomfortable or feel like they don't have the financial means to receive care? Do you think we can put a dent in that percentage over time?
I think so, because I think that's what we've been doing for the last couple of decades. I mean, I like to think that we've made our own dent. I mean, some of the communities that we serve, we call them dental deserts, right? There's a lot of need and yet there's not a lot of access points. And we've worked hard to bring providers and teams to those markets. But I would hope, going to your question, that the industry sees that same opportunity, like really understand, like there is a tremendous amount of diagnosable care that's out there that patients need. And I think the question is, what is preventing them? I think as an industry, we should be asking the question, like, what is preventing them from coming in or accepting that treatment and getting the care that they need? Those, I think, are really important questions. And my hope is, I think that the industry will continue to sort of get better at that and hopefully get more patients into care.
Yeah. So the Aspen Group has obviously made a huge impact on patient care and the consumers in the United States. What is your view on providers? You support thousands of dentists and hygienists. You have the practice ownership program. There's a lot of folks that are coming straight out of school. And also, I've heard you talk about, you can provide a home for doctors that maybe they've been practicing for 5, 6 or longer that have been disenfranchised with all of the things that go into being an independent provider. And they can find their way to Aspen and have some ownership and have a home. How do you think about what needs to be done to support your doctors, dentists, clinicians properly to provide satisfaction?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's funny because as I think about our model and what works here, I think about it almost like in 3 pillars, right? There's this obsession over who is the patient? What are we trying to solve for that particular patient? Thinking about that in a way of like consumer healthcare, right? Then there is the provider. And if you don't have the right provider strategy and alignment and programs that support their needs, like, we talked about customer segmentation and really understanding what the customer wants. I think it's important to understand what the provider wants, right? Because you're fighting for great providers to come into your organization, retaining them. And I always sort of remind the teams, like I always say, like, this is a really hard business without patients. It's an equally hard business without providers, right? And I learned early on that provider alignment and strategy is really going to be key to us, and wanted to build the organization really around the providers. I think that's key. I mean, we are a business support organization providing business support services to doctors. And you mentioned the practice ownership model. A lot of that was born out of providers, maybe a little bit less so today because the graduating classes are different. But when we first started, it was like, hey, I go to school, I graduate, at some point I'm going to own my own practice. So if we didn't have an ability to have an ownership program, we're effectively missing what they want. So if you think about that as as it relates to a consumer offer, and we had to challenge ourselves and say, listen, we want to build the practice ownership program, and we view ourselves as enabling that doctor to become an owner.
Yeah.
Right. We're not the M&A roll-up, acquisition machine that's sort of cashing people out. Right. This is about how do you become a great practice owner within a system. And that I actually believe that's one of the, I look back at some of the decision making, and we haven't always got them all right. But that's one of the ones that we've gotten right. And actually, I would just say, I probably say it's one I can remember early on. I sort of fought for with the board, and they just didn't sort of believe in what we were trying to accomplish, and sort of bought those guys out and implemented. That's how strongly I felt about it. And I think looking back, it's probably one of the better decisions that we made. I mean, we are here today with our success in large part because we have amazing providers. And they do an amazing job, and I'm proud of our practice owners, and they are the foundation to our success. There's no question about it.
And that has to create more alignment with the brand as well, because going back to the statement you made earlier, if there's a bad experience in one practice, it can affect another practice, it can affect somebody else's business. And so when you think about the providers at scale across so many different practices, what are other important elements of alignment that you try to instill? Are there standards of care, procedures, or other expectations that everybody can buy into because you're part of something larger,
right? But
you're also delivering in the ownership model and the practice that you work within.
Yeah. I think the big thing is I look at it like relationships almost, right? And you're going to get married. Do you share the same goals and values?
Yeah.
Right. As that person. I mean, that's sort of the foundation. There might be arguments along the way and disagreements on certain things.
There will be, for sure.
For sure. But you look at that and you say, listen, it does start with like, this is what we are trying to achieve together. Are we aligned with that? Right. And when I go back to think about what is the purpose of each of the brands that we support, one of the fundamental things is we're going into this relationship with this provider. Are we aligned on what that brand is trying to accomplish? Does that energize you? Are you passionate over it, right? I think the other thing just simply is like, we just want good people in the organization.
Yeah.
Your version of good dentistry versus someone else's version of good dentistry, it's hard for me to sort of, I think, sort through that. I'm not a dentist, and it's not my job to do that. We have lots of things that, obviously, you interviewed Dr. Judge not too long ago. He's got an incredible practice support team, and they work with the providers to make sure that they're, the right guidelines and support structures, and make sure that we're sort of doing, that we feel good about what's happening across the organization. But ultimately, you just want good people, honestly. And it sounds simple, but there's a lot to that. And I think that's really important in the organization.
Yeah. And you also have this beautiful facility.
Yeah.
There's a lot of learning and development that goes on as well as it being a support center. Well, explain a bit about the philosophy or approach to continuing to invest in the professional growth of the hygiene teams and the clinical teams and the dentists that you have.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the question. It's in part, we're sitting here because we built this building in Chicago. I moved the business from Syracuse, New York to Chicago, in part because of talent and access, easier access to Syracuse wasn't the easiest place to get to. So a lot of what's here is really centered around learning and development. We have our TAG University. Each brand has a school within that university and a curriculum and whatnot. And that's been really important. But if you think about our growth, because we're not an M&A machine, we're a de novo machine. Right. And so we're bringing new teams in to support these de novos and supporting our practice owners in a way that I think requires it. It just absolutely requires the onboarding, learning development, the sort of, how you integrate your culture and whatnot. I think I would be surprised if anybody in the world spends more on learning and development than us, with our providers, hygienists, and even broader teams. And every time we invest in people, we get a return.
Yeah.
And we hold our L&D teams accountable to that, by the way. Like, which programs are working, which ones aren't, why, do we need to fix them? Do we need to just retire those programs? But we want to make sure that they're disciplined on making sure that those programs are truly adding value. And it's a core function of who we are for sure. Yeah.
I would be curious your perspective, because I think one of the biggest gaps in many DSOs today is that they don't have a very strong function of investing in people so that their people can be excellent as they get promoted into other roles.
Right.
And there's a lot of gaps from an operational excellence perspective. And it's harder when you're not at scale, maybe, to build some of these programs. But many people follow this path of maybe they were an office manager and they were really excelling at that role, and somebody taps them on the shoulder and goes, you should be a regional manager. But then there's no management training. So you go from a function of running an office to influence peddling and saying what needs to happen across many people. And it becomes this broken setup. Dental historically hasn't been fantastic at fostering and building people from within these organizations. At what point did you recognize in kind of the trajectory of Aspen and TAG that it was so important from a people development perspective to start putting these programs in place? And like, at what scale were you where you were actually able to execute on that?
Well, we've had different versions along the way. I'd say, we're not perfect, continuing to sort of iterate on that, because, there's 22,000 people in the organization. So I'd say there's elements that you describe that still happen every day. But the reality is, I think looking back is, I don't think we could have grown without. Like, how do I open up a new site in this market? And if the team doesn't know what to do, right? And so I think the way I think about it is, we had to invest in sort of the core learning and training functions that were important to scale the business, right? And simply, like, how do I run this office? How do I use our our PMS system? How do I think about those things? And then I think we just iterated along the way and saying, listen, what are those other programs that we should invest in, and beyond sort of some of those functional learnings, and think about people and teams and leadership development programs. By the way, for doctors too, because a lot of times they're coming out of school, they think with their hands. Right. And like, okay, well, you're going to have limitations, right? If you just think with your hands, and you have other ways to sort of monetize your license. And if you want to be a practice owner, how do you become a better manager? How do you become a better leader, and supporting them to do those things? And maybe finally, I would just say, I think as smaller companies, it's always like, I think the tendency is it's if you're not measuring the return on it, like really being disciplined, then it's easy to cut these things. Nah, we don't need it. We can just do sort of over the shoulder. They can just say we're on the job training, and we'll send Nancy over there, and she's pretty good at it, and she can do it. Among everything else that she's trying to do, and it just won't scale. And I think you have to be disciplined about it, and measure it. And if you could do that, my hope is, like, at least for us, that we see that return, and we're smart about which programs are really working for us, and hopefully go deep in the ones that we know are important.
Yeah. How many total employees are there now currently?
I think there's 22 to 23,000, something like that, across TAG.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you think about the impact to the patients and the communities that all of your practices have driven, the impacts to the providers, the dentists, the hygienists that have taken place. And when you look at the scale that you've achieved, and at one point, I think there was offices being opened like every 6 days or so. I don't know if
every 4 or 5 days.
Every 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
You can say it takes a village, but really that takes an army to execute on that. How do you think about the opportunity for professional growth from outside the clinical roles within the organization? And I ask it, we in our company, we have, one of our revenue team principals that will invest in your professional development, whether you are here or at another company in the future. Right. We always want the premise to be, we might not be the fit for somebody long-term always, but there should always be looking back where you go like, I learned a lot in my time there, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I didn't have that experience then. And I know that, kind of like an NFL coaching tree, You look out across the industry and in many other DSOs, and there are Aspen alumni who have moved up the ladder and moved into leadership roles. And I've spoken to them, and they attribute their current success to their time that they had within your organization. But when you look at kind of everything outside of the clinical and all the support that is required to support the clinical and the patients, how do you think about professional development, the importance of it, and the opportunities that you want to have for your team members?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I think it's really important. I mean, we have, you mentioned people who've left us. We also had a lot of people who've stayed along the way. And, we've had, people here, 20 plus years, and they've been on this journey. We've learned a lot together. So I think a lot of it's just part of the journey. And you do, hopefully we're surrounding people with good talent, because I think talent management is really important, and we're really thoughtful about that. But I mentioned TAG-U, like even though you have schools in each of the brands, you also have a curriculum that is sort of agnostic to the brand. And that would be like things like leadership programs, professional development programs, and making sure that we're bringing our high potential leaders through those programs. We support them in-house. We support them with programs outside the organization. And listen, I say this all the time. I mean, we are as good as our teams, and making sure we hold our leaders accountable to not only their own professional development, because I think part of it's on them, but making sure that they support that within their teams, and that they have high quality teams, because the business hasn't gotten any easier.
No.
Right. And so you want to make sure your teams are talented. I would also say, like, again, another reason why we came to Chicago, it was a bigger, third largest city in the country, much bigger pool of talent. And I think when we did this back in 2017, so 10 years ago, basically, we were like, listen, we loved Syracuse and upstate New York, but we just couldn't get the talent there. Like, people loved the story, and we'd go on this recruiting journey and do all this stuff. And they're like, I'm not sure I want to move there. Right. And so, in part, I mean, I share that because I think it just demonstrates our commitment to talent, and without it, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your leadership style a little bit and how it's changed over the years.
Yeah.
I think I was reading, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but you founded in 1998, and by like 2005 or 2006, it was 70 or 80 practices.
I don't know.
Somewhere in that range. Okay. All right.
I don't know. It's not right.
And at some point, there was kind of this exponential curve, and it really took off. Probably had to lay the foundation and put the systems and processes in place and really dial in what the approach was going to be. When you think about kind of the trajectory of your 30 years, almost 30 years here at the helm, what are some of the things that you think are completely different about your style today than when you first started out, and how has the role really changed from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, if you just get like sort of really, if you go back to whatever period of time, I mean, you're making a lot of those decisions every day. I mean, you're sort of calling balls and strikes all day long, and that doesn't scale. It won't scale. And at some point, you sort of have to sit back and say, like, geez, am I using my time appropriately and in a way that can scale the business? And I used to go to every single location, up to like 500 or 600 locations as we were building them out.
Okay.
And that's how crazy it was. Like, you can't do that. Right. And so our real estate team would go and look at the markets and then do the sites. And I would go on these site tours with them. And you can imagine, you're all over the country. It doesn't work. At some point I'm like, I got to graduate from that. It just doesn't work. So for me, I think, that's changed, and I make sure I put the right team around me. So I think that's really critical. But I'll be honest with you, I think, one of the things I had to learn as a leader, in addition to sort of just making sure I have the right team around me and what decisions are important for me to make versus the team, I probably struggled early on with culture. I thought culture was this sort of HR thing. Put a poster up, we believe in trust. Well, no shit. Who does it, right? We believe in honesty.
Right.
Okay. And so what we really had to think about as we were growing, I had to think about as a leader, what it really meant, and, the purpose of the brand and the values. And while I could influence things when it was smaller and get my arms around the organization at some point, this is probably what maybe you're referring to, we got to a level and you're sort of like, ew, sort of cracks in the organization.
Right.
And I'd be like, well, why don't people just know what to do? Like, like, why don't they act and behave like I think they should?
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Yep.
And so we spent a lot of time on culture, because I think culture to me is almost like, think about the 22,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is almost like this distributed system to make decisions.
Yeah.
Across, you have 22,000 people making how many decisions every day?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the right culture and they're not clear on the purpose and what the purpose of the brand and our values, boy, that's not going to work. So going back to your question, I think one of the things from my perspective that I had to adjust and learn was the importance of culture. It wasn't just an HR thing. It really is sort of the foundation to our scale. There's no way that we would be where we are today without that, I think. And by the way, you still got to work at it. Still every day, right? I always talk about like communications, the sort of the air that we breathe as leaders, and you're saying a lot of the same things over and over and over again. And I think it's just required from all of our leaders to do that and remind people the things that are important to us.
Yeah. That was really well said. So it becomes the lens within which decisions are made at scale for the whole organization.
Yeah.
I felt the same way. And when I first got into technology, they had all of the core values and stuff on the walls of the first software company. Yeah. I thought it was so cheesy and hokey, and I was like, I'm not buying into this. Yeah. And over the years, it's kind of been the same realization where it's like, wow, this is probably the most core important thing that you have to get right in order to extend the strength and the success of the business and the organization. When you think about where you're going over the next couple of years, there's now 5 brands underneath the Aspen Group portfolio.
Yeah.
Lots of consumer healthcare, the urgent care and aesthetics, and Clear Choice. When you kind of take a step back, it looks like there could be lots of synergies between the approach. Like, how do you think about it?
Yeah, and pet care. I get that question.
Yes.
Like, wait, pet? How's this all fit in?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's funny because all the brands, if you think about what it is that we're trying to do, it starts with like, who is the patient we're trying to serve? What are their needs, right? I think about that segmentation again.
Yeah.
And those core learnings that we've been able to, learn and understand at Aspen so well, bringing those to the other brands, I think is really critical. So it does start, I think, that synergy of what we went through there, I think is really important. So take that, for example, been a lot of investment, a lot of M&A, financial engineering, if you will, right? It's sort of an arbitrage play. But there's not been sort of at scale this sort of national consumer-oriented, sort of pet vet model yet. And pet parents want same thing, convenience and access and a better journey and whatnot. And so when we think about that, we think about it in the way that we built Aspen. And so there's synergy there in our thought process and our teams. They also have providers. Right? Yeah. Providers want to join us. Do they want to stay with us? Are they aligned to that brand? Right. And so when we think about the model that we're building there, very synergistic in that way. Right. And then it won't scale without culture. So those core pillars are really critical. Now they're supported by centers of excellence. And by the way, when you're that small, you can imagine the resources I had at 30 locations versus the resources that we have today and that we're able to bring in to help support these brands for their growth and scale. So that's where the synergies are, and so like, again, think about them as a consumer healthcare platform, and the output, yes, dentistry, or yes, pet care, or yes, medical aesthetics. But those other things, I think, are where the synergies are.
Yeah. So you have a blueprint.
Yeah.
That allows for scale and to really support and scale some of these, what initially are smaller organizations when you first did the acquisition. Do you think that there's a play for, will we see like an Aspen Group corner that has all of these services offered in the same location, where a consumer is able to do the aesthetics, the dental, and take care of their animal. It's like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I see some co-locations. You got to remember, like each brand may have a different segment, be serving a different segment of the market.
Yeah.
To where people shop for their goods or services, that medical aesthetics, guest may not be, in the same spot as maybe where we locate, the vet hospital or Aspen Dental or Clear Choice. So I think in some cases you see co-locations. But whether or not we're physically together, I think there's opportunity to be a part of the TAG family that offers, I think, benefits to those, guests or patients or pet parents or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's opportunities and synergies there that we're working. And in some cases, by the way, we already do co-locate. We co-locate with Aspen and Clear Choice have co-locations, and Aspen and Well now have co-locations. And so you do get some of that co-location.
Got it. Back to the leadership piece, I had one other question that just kind of came back into my head.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that you used to go to every single practice, and you're at 500, you go, this is not scalable. I think about leadership journeys that people have, and oftentimes you have to give something up that you actually enjoy doing. Like there's parts of the job where like, this is actually something I really like, but I now know it's no longer my responsibility. And it's some of the hardest decisions the leaders have to make is when they can give it away.
Right.
Are there any things that are kind of top of mind that you particularly enjoyed doing at the early phases of running the business that now are somebody else's responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I still take it very seriously. I'm not in the day-to-day, but like I really loved working with the providers.
Yeah.
And the real deep relationships and supporting them and and tapping them for ideas and what we're doing. And now you sort of sit back. It's impossible to, we have so many relationships. It's impossible to have that deep relationship with so many. So I miss that a little bit, but you realize you have to the team needs to carry that part of the organization on, right? It just has to happen. I like the marketing side. Yeah. And I think I have good instincts for it, but I'm not a trained marketer. So I know there's people better at it than me, and so, but it's so key to the patient acquisition funnel is important. But you recognize that there's real professionals out there that are better than I. It doesn't mean I can't participate and play in that sandbox once in a while, but yeah. But listen, at the end of the day, I also like things. There's new things to learn and new challenges. And I think that's part of the energy that I get as the company continues to grow. So while I may have given up something that I like, it's usually replaced with something that I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So
there's not too many DSOs and groups that are still founder-led, especially over the past few years. And there's been so much turnover, especially in the mid-market space. On the technology sector where I'm from, there's always this view that founder-led organizations have an advantage. And you think of like a Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook or a Steve Jobs with Apple or Jeff Bezos with Amazon who stepped away. But that maybe the premise behind that is you're more willing to make big bets or get an argument with the board about ownership program. I do think there's validity to that. Do you see that, it affords you an opportunity as the one that founded this business to maybe think about things differently than if you brought in an outside leader?
I mean, I'd like to think that there are some advantages. I mean, there's no question. I mean, the institutional knowledge that you have, just that you could hopefully see things pretty clearly because I've been doing it for 27 years. If I can't see it today, I'll never will. So I think there's that. There's no question. I do think a lot of founders probably are more willing to take on some risk. I think founders are also trying to get rid of bureaucracy and be able to have the organization have the right agility. You can even within our own group, we sort of fight this all the time. You bring in lots of people from lots of other bigger organizations, and the time to get things done, the complexity in the organization, and so I think that becomes, you try to root that out and keep that sort of founder's mentality. And then for me, I would imagine the same with other founders. Maybe another advantage is that you you might have this paranoia around it's never good enough. Well, weather's changed, but I look out my office and I see the tallest building here in Chicago used to be the Sears Tower.
Yep.
You have to sit back and say, why does Sears exist?
Yeah.
And there's a graveyard of brands out there that don't exist anymore.
Right.
And somewhere along the way, they either made bad decisions or they weren't willing to make tough decisions. Right. And then the world changes around them. And then all of a sudden they don't have any customers. Customers vote. They're going to vote for us or they're going to vote for someone else. And I think, this goes back to sort of my philosophy around brands and sort of how we think about those things. But I like to think founders maybe are a little bit, maybe because that paranoia, people say I have this like passionate discontent of like, is it, we're not quite good enough. We're not quite good enough. We got to continue to iterate and the marketplace is changing. But I believe in that. And I think there's a lot of evidence around that. When you take a look at brands, they could be here. But they didn't change. Consumers changed. And next thing you know, you're on the downside, and that's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. Is that part of, kind of what excites you every day? Like what still keeps you motivated to push and to show up and continue to work on these hard problems?
Yeah. I mean, I like that challenge.
Yeah.
I do. I don't know. It's just in me. I like the challenge of trying to figure things out. I hate no's. I'm like, there's always a way. Like there's a way we can get through this. And I don't know. That's sort of just it revs me up a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's part of who I am, I guess. I would imagine maybe a lot of founders that way.
Yeah. I was actually just listening to Palmer Luckey, who's the CEO and founder of Anduril. They do lots of government contracts and drones and all these crazy things. He's kind of a crazy guy, but he initially sold his business. It was a $1 billion sale to Facebook before he founded this. And they were asking him, like, what is enough? Like, when would you be done working? He goes, well, I could just be on a beach drinking a Mai Tai, but that's never been appealing to me, which is probably why, like, I actually achieved the success that I had. Like it's one of those things where it's part of how you're built to continue to build. And even if you achieve the success, you're still looking to create new things.
I mean, I see that for sure. I really do. I get a lot of value out of those challenges. I get a lot of value out of my team. I learn from my team every day too. Hopefully they're coming in with different sets of experiences and points of view. And so it's a continuous learning journey. Think about how the world's changing now with AI, right? Talk about like, okay, where's this going?
Yeah.
And what's it mean for our organization? So I don't know. I like that. I think it, to the point that you're just making, I just don't see me ready to hang up the skates yet.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. One of the things I appreciate about this industry is, we have some of these, I don't know if hopefully this is not an offensive term, like elder statesmen. We got yourself, we got yourself, we got Pat Bauer, we've got Steve Thorne, folks that have been in the space for a really long time. Yeah. And they're still giving back to the space. They'll still go to shows or conferences and they'll speak on panels and participate in our Dental Capital Forum, which we really appreciated. What responsibility do you believe that you have to kind of give back to the space and the industry that's given you and this organization so much over the years?
Well, I mean, first of all, those guys are great. They've been great friends. Same with Dr. Workman, Steve Bill. There's a lot of them there who've really helped shape the industry, and I'm proud of my relationships with them. And so from my perspective, the give back, I think the main give back is we want people to do it right.
Yeah.
And I think our sense of right, what that means in terms of adding value to providers, making sure that you're doing your best to deliver good care and taking that responsibility seriously.
Yeah.
I don't think we need more DSOs or more dental companies. We need better dental companies and better DSOs, honestly.
Yeah.
And I do think there's going to be a shakeout, and because you're just not, you can't financially engineer your way to a company that adds value. The next, it's not about being the largest. It's the ones that really can figure out how do I add value to patients and providers every day. I think those are the ones that are going to continue to excel. And those companies can't figure that out. They're not going to be around.
Yeah.
And so I think when we go to conferences, I think we try to, as much as we possibly can, trying to say, hey, listen, there's a couple things that are really important. And sometimes we feel like, hopefully a lot of groups, if we can help them figure it out, then I think all boats rise and come in a rising tide type thing. Yeah.
Hey, Bob, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate the conversation.
Right.
And again, thank you for hosting us here
Absolutely.
at your beautiful office.
All right. Thanks.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.